Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a new edition of the Daily Debate. In tonight's show, we're going to be focusing on Egypt's preparations ahead of the upcoming presidential elections slated for next month, the 26th and the 28th of March, a little bit over a month. We're also going to be talking about the Operation Sinai 2018 to uproot terrorism that has been quite comprehensive in recent weeks. And joining us here in the studio to shed more light on this issue is Dr. محمد, the political analyst. Dr. الحليم, thank you very much for joining us.
A pleasure, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, before we start our discussion, let's check out this report regarding the comprehensive operation in northern and central Sinai 2018, and we'll be right back.
The military operation launched in Sinai implements the instructions of the President and Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces to the General Command of the Armed Forces and the Ministry of Interior to wage a comprehensive battle against terrorism and other criminal activities in northern and central Sinai, the Delta, the Nile Valley and the Western Desert. The Armed Forces and Ministry of Interior take all necessary actions, including training maneuvers and other operational tasks, to tighten security along Egypt's borders to ensure the elimination of terrorist layers, safeguard Egyptian society from terrorism and extremism, and confront all other types of crime detrimental to security and stability ahead of the presidential election next month. Preparations for the COS 2018 began when President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi appointed Lieutenant General Muhammad Farid as Army Chief of Staff and tasked him with the puring Sinai of terrorism within 3 months. Early preparations, including the collection of accurate data from across the country and the systematic analysis of all information collected. Vital installations had to be totally secured before the operation began, and all government organizations and agencies needed to be fully prepared to undertake the roles during the course of the operation. Through Sinai is part of the operation's code name. It covers the entire country. The operation has 2 levels of comprehensiveness. The first is the qualitative comprehensiveness, which is manifested in 2 ways. One is the involvement of all branches and sectors of the military and security forces, from the Air Force, Navy and border patrols to special forces such as the commanders, paratroopers and rapid deployment forces. The second, the qualitative dimension, is that the strategy entails not just the planned military operations but also exercises and maneuvers undertaken simultaneously by participating forces. The operational sphere extends across all areas and all strategic directions to the east, west, south and center within a framework of close cooperation nationally. One senses is a genuine will to rid Sinai of terrorists, even if only because of day-to-day concerns such as the availability of goods and fuel, transport and communications. During combing operations, 23 explosive devices were disabled, 22 4-wheel drive vehicles used by terrorist elements were confiscated.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Starting off our discussion right away. Dr. Al-Halim, now this operation in Sinai has been going on for years. However, over the past few weeks, we have seen quite extensive, comprehensive activities by the armed forces and security forces, really eliminating a lot of the terrorists and their hideouts. How do you explain such a swift and strong actions by the armed forces in these weeks?
Well, it is quite anticipated in the course of time. All of us, actually, as Egyptian citizens, we do really, wait that moment since quite a long period of time. But each single individual military action and decision, as much as commandment and order, on the part of the supreme authority, actually, of the armed forces, actually, will have to have its own way, actually, in the due course of time, in a certain time, in a certain place. So supposedly that sort of decision of annihilation and putting an end for all these terrorist acts and all these, actions of sabotage, as much as extremism, as much as, destruction of all the the major infrastructure of the Egyptian society would come in the due course of time. We would anticipate that sort of straightforward decision since quite a long period of time, but I think that prior to the presidential election, actually, there are some threats from, different parts, and high-profile authorities actually would, spread the tidings and information that there are massive, as much as sweeping attempts on the part of all these terrorist groups, as much as Daesh figures, actually, to make and to assume some sabotage actions, as much as annihilation, interferences within the governorate. That's why it was quite anticipated that at this particular stage that the comprehensive operation at the northern part, as much as the central part of Sinai, 2018 is quite in the due course of time. The fact that I would really shed a spot and a light on the exact meaning of that sort of comprehensive ferocious attack on the part of our own armed forces, as much as the police personnel, I would say. As it stands, actually, it is comprehensive, insofar as it is gonna to put an end for almost all the actions and reactions of all those terrorist groups, no matter how ferocious they may seem to be, particularly when Mr. Sisi, since, in less than 1 month, actually did give his own commandments and orders, actually, to the supreme staff of the armed forces, actually, to try to put an end for all these, ferocious actions in less than 3 months. And I think that he said a word and he meant it. He is taking, actually, that sort of decision in such a way as to be accumulated in the course of time. And it is comprehensive, insofar as by the end of these 3 months, hopefully that almost all these actions and all these negative attitudes on the part of all these terrorist groups will come to a 0 point. In much same way that it is commonly timed in 2018. I think that by the end of 2018, all these, negative actions will come to also a 0 point. That's why, it seems to be quite aptly titled, aptly named, with a sort of agreed of cooperation, actually, on both, tripartite, forces of the military forces, of the armed forces, of the police personnel, as much as of the special troops in the meantime, who would have to interfere every now and again. This is not actually the whole story, because I think that measures will be taken to the maximal degree of intensification, actually, concerning safety and security, particularly on the borderlines of the 27 governorates of Egypt, for fear of all these terrorist figures and all these, hired murderers, I would say, would try to escape once they would seem that the Operation Theta actually is being concentrated on them on the spot. With such a consummating sort of a sudden ferocious attack that they will have to try to escape, particularly within the parts of the Suez Canal, as much as to the near adjacent, governorates. That's why you can really find that high commandments and orders actually will be dedicated straightforwardly to the directors of all these governorates to try to be as much cautious as can be, to take actually precautions and the amendments of safety and security to the maximal level at this particular stage initially.
Well, is there a reason why the armed forces and the security forces weren't that comprehensive earlier on? What is the significance of being that brutal and that comprehensive right now? Why didn't it happen months ago?
Well, I said, that, each single individual decisive action and order, as much as commandment and interference on the part of the armed forces, would come from the highest and the supreme authority, actually. You still remember when Mr. Sisi, actually, in one of his own speeches, he did, prevail and did disclose, actually, to his own people that I know it inside out. I know almost it's from within as much as from without. The sort of the information and accumulation of the knowledge, particularly of the advances of all these terrorist attacks, would be, proposed to His Own Excellency, actually, on a daily basis. So the man would know the minutiae as much as the tidings, actually, of the interference of those people in a way that the only citizen would have no any idea about. That's why he knows it inside out, as much as he would have to decide, actually, the right time and the right place with the right personnel, so to speak. Those special armed forces actually to interfere. Particularly, I think that prior to the presidential race, We have had some, threatening voices on the part of some, terroristic groups, particularly Daesh ones, I would say, that they would assume some interferences just by way of quantitative operations of sabotage, of demolition, of destroying as much as of reproducing hired murders the way it used to be done a couple of years ago in Libya. That's why, I think that in the due course of time the decision is to be taken, in much the same way that actually it was not to be a little as much as or a bit late as it was to be anticipated. It was decided in the due course of time by a man who would know how to do, what to do, and the way of doing it in the right time, within the right place.
Well, the President also mentioned that the war to uproot terrorism is not just in Sinai, but also all over Egypt and the governorates and the western borders. Do you expect to see huge leaps of progress in the different governorates and on the western borders as well, as much as we're seeing in Sinai?
Absolutely right. The fact that, since a couple of years, you can really anticipate that the presidential authority is trying to take high amendments and, fortifications by initiating and inaugurating military bases, the Jajub, the Hammam, the Mohammed Naguib one, as much as, fortifying also the Aswan airport in much the same way that he was very much busy during the course of the previous couple of months actually to fortify the, territories of Halab and Shalatin, of inhabiting them, of cultivating them, of trying to modernizing them as much as he really can. In much the same way that he is very much busying himself as much as his own armed forces actually with securing and safeguarding the borderlines of Egypt, particularly from the western part. And that will make the toll a bit maximized actually for our own armed forces. When the case in Libya is very much stable, if we don't have, a charismatic leadership actually in Libya that would do all and assume all the natural actions and the actions of the Libyan people, that would minimize, the cost of safeguarding and providing as much as fortifying and posting our border lines. But the case, what it is actually, that Libya is what we all know, is very much free from, secure as much as, safe, decisive leadership, as much as the sort of the slight tussle actually that did occur on the part of Khalifa bin Qasim Haftar as much as Faiz al-Sarraj, actually the leader of the reconciliation or the Wafaq government, would maximize the prices that are to be paid actually on securing our own border lines, because we don't have any sort of agreement with the Libyan government actually to safeguard both border lines between Egypt on the one hand as much as Libya on the other. That's why actually the toll is being very maximized and the price is a bit heavy. You still remember that a couple of years when there was an attempt on the part of the Daesh group actually to try to put an end for the our own dear Christian brothers actually. The immediate presidential decisive order was to put an end actually for all these groups on the spot in less than 6 hours actually. Our own armed forces side by side with our own very much ferocious pilots outside would assume a sort of an airist right. And then back again, actually. That was a master stroke on the part of the presidential authority. And I think it was such a decisive as much as straightforward, actually, lesson for all those groups, particularly Daesh ones, that would flee from Libya as much as from Syria and Iraq, lastly, actually, to try not actually to interfere and to penetrate within the borderlines of Egypt. So, apart from, the allegations of some people who would actually deny the interferences of all these armed forces and the sort of the extreme sense and the huge amounts of money that are to be, paid for fortifying our own borderlines, actually, it turned out to be in the due course of time that this is a must, and we would have to be very much careful, actually, of fortifying and of posting, of paying almost all what we would possess, actually, just for the sake of our own children, just for the sake of our own future generation, as much as the safety and security of our own borderlines, actually, that came to be regarded part and parcel of our own dignity, as much as respectability, I would say.
Well, speaking of future generations and the armed forces and all the cadets and the soldiers who sacrifice their lives for such operations, the President actually made a surprise visit early in the morning yesterday to the military academy where he inspected the training and the exercises of the cadets and had breakfast with them. What is the significance of such a visit, a surprise visit by the President to the military academy?
Very much encouraging, actually, his own sons, actually, his own soldiers. It's a sort of striking one of the highest lessons of democracy, actually, of how to participate, of how to mingle, of how to mix with his own dear sons, actually. He wouldn't treat them, actually, as much as a charismatic leader would deal with his own soldiers as much as officers. He's dealing with them since quite his own early presidential period, about 4 years ago, as much as a dear father actually would deal with a great deal of kindness actually towards his own sons. And I think that in that way he would strike one of the highest lessons actually of mutually identifying himself with his own soldiers, with his own sons, so to speak, as much as actually of encouraging and boosting their own spirits to the highest level in such a way as that they would seem to be, as he might have described them before, as ferocious soldiers, very much courageous officers,
yes.
I would say.
Yes. Well, these triumphs in the war against terrorism in Sinai, also accompanied by the solution, the diplomatic solution, the triumph of the presidency and the government in solving the Nile Basin waters issue with Ethiopia and Sudan, also accompanied by all the efforts that have been made in the energy sector and really securing the three power plants that should be operational by the end of June. Do you feel that all these things would actually help push President Sisi's chances in the upcoming presidential election?
Of course, well, I mean, as I've told before in more than one episode, actually, all the, the previous achievements and the goals that had been done, all the previous types of, didactic elements and moral lessons as much as the ethical details, actually, and the great deal of success that the man did too, actually, during the course of the previous 4 years, would strike such a providing example, actually, for being highly such an eligible figure, the own and only figure, actually, on the presidential race, as I might, entitled him before, in more than one episode, that he's the man of the hour. The man would strike a very good example, actually, of being the best among the rest, actually. The only charismatic leader that would deal with the circumstances of, the borderlines of Egypt in such a way as much as actually to put, an end for all these ferocious actions on the part of terrorists. And in the meantime, he strikes a very good, successful example of dealing with all these circumstances, actually. All the problematic situations as much as the dilemmas of the social inconveniences, actually, of the lack of some, food and beverage, and the lack of safety and security, of the lack of immunity, the lack of the sense of integrity in the borderlands have been dealt with, as much as with a master stroke, I would say. It looks as though that within a very few period of time, actually, how we deal with all these, very much high-profile issues, as much as very much threatening details, actually, in a way that no many other charismatic leader would do. Let me say, actually, let alone, the Jew administrative capital, actually, that would strike one of the best examples, actually, of how prodigious the achievements of the man is or would be. The fact that, you can really imagine that Singapore is as much as in kilometers, in size, in width, and length, actually, as much as, the new administrative is. And I think that sort of very much extensive effort that has been paid in less than 1 year, actually, to accumulate the sort of the capital, the way it is to be done, as much as very much keeping an eye on, actually, establishing the sense of communicability and friendliness among Muslims and Christians by building a very huge and very much, religious as much as very much, credential, actually, Jesus Christ Church, as much as a very big mosque. In the meantime, he's initiating the sense of belonging, actually, the sense of being very much belonging to one's own entity, to one's main native spot in less than 1 year. So I think that no many other man actually could entail and could assume all these prodigious and very much extensive, successful details, as much as very much imaginative details that had been done in less than 1 year, I would say. And if you really examine the previous 4 years, actually, you can really find extensive roads, expansion of the Suez Canal, the fisheries, and the Dama pool as much as. In the meantime, you know, the very big issue actually of Cyprus, of Greece, of, you know, the Zohri, you know, I mean, field actually, the sort of the field that would inaugurate enmity actually on the part of the Turkish group as much as the Israeli side. You still remember that in less than 1 week, actually, you know, I mean, Turkey was very much, you know, I mean, intimidated by thought of egregious success on the part of the Egyptian presidential authority, side by side with the Greek one, as much as the Cypriot, to the extent that, you know, I mean, they attempted in somehow or another, actually, to attack the Italian country and the Italian company outside, as much as the borderlines, actually, of Greek as much as Cyprus. That would give us a great testimony to the fact that the man was very much successful. At the time that the people would seem to be quite very much lethargic, very much idling here, there and everywhere, unaware of the besieging threats of danger that was threat Egypt, the man was very much alert, was very much cautious actually, of almost bit and piece actually that would come actually to the safety and security of our own borderline, I would say.
Yes, definitely. Ladies and gentlemen, we're now joined over the phone by Dr. Sharif Amir, the Professor of Geopolitics at the University of Paris. Dr. Amir, can you hear us, sir?
Yeah, I hear very well. Hello.
Hello, sir. Dr. Amir, first of all, the comprehensive Operation Sinai 2018 that has really been uprooting terrorism by storm over the past few weeks. How much do you feel this will have of an effect on the international affairs and Egypt's dynamics in the international community right now?
Well, it has two sides. The first side is that we are proving to the international community that we are capable of fighting terrorism effectively. We have strong armed forces that is operating everywhere, deployed everywhere. Let's not forget something very important, that the day the operations were launched, there was two branches of terrorist branches arrested inside the capital, inside Egypt. That means that we are operative against terrorism on the home front and on the broad front. That's something impressive without any casualties within the civilians. The second point is that, of course, on the regional level, that means that Egypt is capable of securing its oil fields, gas fields. We are talking openly now about the threats that we are facing in the East Mediterranean. So that means that our forces are capable also to act against let's say, the regular threats from regular armies from countries like Turkey, for example. There is a point which is very interesting, is that the international media, lots of them, tried to ignore at the beginning the Egypt's campaign against terrorism. And I think this was, the comprehensive Operation Sinai 2018. And I think this was because it was a shock for many of the mainstream media who were influenced by Qatar and Turkey against Egypt. They used to cover the terrorist attacks in Egypt, and they never covered Egypt's response in fighting terrorism. So I think they were under the shock, and they didn't expect that we will act unanimously as a nation, an army, the police, and even the Egyptian people supporting the efforts of its army and police. So it was a kind of a shock that the nation rose just in a day and started fighting terrorism. Some people were asking, for example, why the timing? The timing, well, this is left in the hands of our president and the strategists working on it. They have the timing and they have the means how to operate on it. So I think that internationally we have proven that the arms deals, for example, that we got, it was used properly against terrorists. That's not a country using its force against any other country. We're defending our sovereignty, our security. We are acting firmly. We would not let the infiltrators coming from Daesh, the Islamic State, from other countries to have a hotbed or a safe haven in Sinai. We would not let it happen. We are ready to fight according to the international law. And the same thing in the Eastern Mediterranean.
Well, Dr. Amir, do you feel that this operation and the success it is witnessing would actually prompt and push the movements of the economic and trade zones around the Suez Canal, and would also really push for the energy sector and the companies to start their exploration and excavation of the natural gas resources in the Mediterranean?
You mean, is it going to harm it or not?
No. Is it going to push it forward? Is it going to start it off?
Yeah, let's not hasten the results immediately, of course. Actually, we have a very unstable region. We have a very dangerous, unstable president in Ankara, in Turkey, who's launching wars everywhere, threatening Turkey, threatening Cyprus, threatening Greece, and now trying to stop the expeditions. And President Sisi said it before that there was intimidations, provocations against our exploration there, but we responded. So I think the time will take its course. I think we have to wait a couple of months. At the end of May, maximum, we will see things clearer. But let's not forget that companies like Eni, the Italian company, and all the partners in Cyprus, in Greece, are working hand in hand. We are working hand in hand with the foreign investors, with the foreign companies. I think that the Suez Canal is highly secure, excellently secure. We have an excellent navy controlling this part in the Red Sea. We have the second. We have now the second fleet. It's an excellent navy working there and the East Mediterranean. So I think that things will be will slow down for a time, because of course Turkey, we cannot neglect its presence. And it's just a threatening neighbor for everyone. So I think that once the things in Afrin, for example, in Syria, and the intervention of the Turks there, I think with time, when maybe the Turkish leadership will calm down, I think that the region, the whole region, will be settled again. And I think that we will have positive results. But still, we are working on our gas fields. We have seen today the new statement of our defense statement of our armed forces, and it showed the pictures. We have shown the whole work, how Zohr, which is the gas field, is protected, highly protected. Our excellent navy, our superb navy, is working 24 hours a day protecting it. We have all the possibilities to repel any attack. So I think now they are all working securely. They know any investors, they come, they know that it's a strong country, that is a strong navy, that is a strong army, there is a strong internal police, and they can work freely. And about the Suez Canal, I think that we are launching our projects normally, as long as we have the ability to defend our sovereignty and our security.
Yes. Dr. Sharif Amir, Professor of Geopolitical Affairs at the University of Paris, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Dr. Al-Halim, the situation with Turkey and their operation, the olive branch in Syria, how should Egypt actually react or view or study this operation and the Turkish behavior, military behavior nowadays?
Right. From day one, actually, Egyptian armed forces actually was quite aware of how dire the situation is on the part of the Golan Heights as much as the Syrian territories. The fact that you still remember that Mr. Fattah Sisi at one time he said one of his own famous, very much, misunderstood on the part of the other countries, which is just the distance, actually, that has been misconceived as much as misinterpreted on the part of all other Arab countries, which is how to fortify those armed forces of those adjacent Arab countries, of how to let them actually be highly trained by the Egyptian personnel, by the Egyptian modern means of technology in the part of fighting, safeguarding, as much as posting the border lines. So from day one, actually, we have had what you might call an upper hand within the Syrian territories, but through peaceful negotiations, through interfering every now and again, the sort that would intimidate the American administration. Still remember that in 2016, when, Mr. Vladimir Putin would say that the only negotiable man, actually, the man of the hour, that is Mr. Fattah Sisi, is the only man in the Middle East who would, solidify as much as put the end for all the tussles and the problematic issues in Syria. You can really anticipate how immediately, actually, the reaction on the part of the American administration, which is the demolition of the Russian aeroplane in Sharm el-Sheikh. And then there was another one striking episode, an example that would testify to the fact that how the Egyptian role is very much fortified, not only in Syrian territories, but also in the Palestinian case. In the meantime, immediately when Mr. Fattah Sisi would say in the General Assembly of UN Security Council, actually, that all those, culprit countries, that is Russia, as much as America, and much the same way that the Turkish authority actually are very much involved in Syria, just by way preventing actually the establishment of the Kurdish state, that we have to pay for the price of reconstruction. Immediately you can really find that there was such a long series of scandalous attempts on the part of those terrorist acts, actually, to, kill and demolish, actually, the very much, peaceful lives of the Christians, and attack on Tanta Church of Abbasiyya Cathedral, as much as the series would inevitably follow. That would give us a very clear testimony to the fact that Egypt is playing from day one, actually, such a very much forceful role, actually, in the Syrian issue, and much the same way that it did play as much as, stretch a hand of peacefulness, actually, for Hamas. For the Libyan brothers, as much as for the tussle that did exist for quite a long period in Yemen. So, the Western eye, particularly the new American administration, is keeping an eye of cautiousness, actually, on the supreme advance and very much what you might call extensive progress on the part of the achievements and the military advances on the part of our own armed forces, and the regularities and regulations and the very much successful orders of our own presidential authority during the course of the previous years. That's why you'd have to be very much careful that any sort of successful detail, any sort of very much notable action on the part of Mr. Fattah Sisi as being dedicated, actually, to try to put an end for all the tussles in Syrian territories, actually, would be reacted with, a ferocious attack on the part of the American administration. It's a sort of success that would clarify as much as testify to the issue that Egypt will always be there, not only on a very much national arena, but on the international level, securing as much as safeguarding, as much as providing very much helpful details, very much unnoticeable notions, actually, just by way of solving the problematic and everlasting problem of the Syrian, territories,
yes.
I would say.
Well, should we be cautious or concerned about these Turkish military advances in Syria? Should we be concerned about the Zohr gas field?
From day one, actually, this is, as I just said at the very beginning of the episode, that, Mr. Hani, this is a master stroke, actually. It was anticipated, actually, since quite a long period of time, perhaps in a couple of years, that it was to be planned by Mr. Fattah Sisi as much as his own advisors, actually, that they tend to solve a very much a prodigious problem in the field of gas. The Zohr gas field, actually, is very much providing millions and millions of hectares, actually, of gas, to the extent that it could not only solve the problematic issue of the lack and the shortage of gas in Egypt, but also in other adjacent Arab countries, to the extent that we can really have a sort of import as much as export in that particular field. The sort of the thing that we would have had a sort of a very sharp lack of, which is the shortage of gas, now will be provided by Egyptian authorities, but the sort of remapping and recharting the sort of the border lines with Greece as much as with Cyprus, you know. So, I mean, we can really anticipate sort of sudden attacks on the part, actually, of the Turkish authorities. The sort of the attack also, actually, on Afrin is a clear testimony to the fact that this is a sort of an intimidation on the part of the Turkish authorities as much as their own ferocious attack on, you know, the Italian gas companies, as much as, you know, the border lines of the remapping of the Mediterranean eastern part of the Zohr gas fields is a clear also testimony to the fact that you'd have also from day one be very much cautious. And I see no reason why, you know, I mean, we don't have, you know, expand our own armed forces, armed military bases here, there, and everywhere. You know, I mean, this is a very much a straightforward and direct message on the part of Mr. Sisi that we are quite aware of all these attacks, of all these imminent attacks, I would say. And in the due course of time, we are striking a very good example that no matter how very much immense sort of external attack on the part of any sort of power on our own border lines, either internally or even externally, would have to be very much on the spot, very much alert, very much cautious, as much as conscious of.
Yes. Well, Dr. Al-Halim, now let's go back to the presidential elections that will start in a little bit more than a month. Two contestants. Do you feel that it will be very much of a contest or not so much? And do you think that this will affect the turnout for the presidential elections? The
Egyptian individual average of citizens are quite aware of how successful the man is. No matter how any sort of propaganda or, you know, I mean, publicizing, you know, some hidden facts or taciturn agreements or trying to revitalize any sort of single individual action on any part of any sort of nominee, I would say, no matter he or she may be, would come to no avail at the end of the day. This is a sort of waste of time, actually, for any sort of advance on the part of any sort of nominee, I would say. Because the individual average of Egyptian citizens are quite in the know, keeping an eye of almost how prodigious and how straightforward and how immense the sort of the effort that's to be exerted, actually, since 4 years, actually, very much noticeable, very much, you know, I mean, in the eyes of almost every single individual human being, not only in Egypt, but also our other adjacent Arab countries, actually, such as Libya, such as Yemen, I would say, Syria, even in the Golan Heights, and even in, you know, I mean, Tunisia, even in Palestine territories, actually. They are quite aware of how forceful the Egyptian, you know, I mean, role that is to be played by the man in the course of time. And I think that I would insist on saying, actually, that he will always be quite anticipated and very much re-elected every now and again, just by way of solving our own everlasting problematic issues, particularly those attacks on the part of other enemy forces, actually.
Yes. Well, Foreign Minister Sameh Shukri has actually stressed the government's full support and commitment to holding fair and transparent and democratic presidential elections. And quite recently also the National Elections Commission has stated that they received requests from numerous non-governmental organizations to observe and monitor these presidential elections. How far do you feel the success of the government and the National Elections Commission allowing a lot of the NGOs to monitor and observe these elections will give a true and transparent image of the democratic atmosphere of the upcoming elections?
Well, I think that we have nothing to be afraid of, nothing to be panicked actually of. Everything will be quite glaring and very much widely open for discussion, very much publicizing all the hidden agendas. We don't have something to be very much secretized. We don't have anything to be very much privatized, actually, on the national, you know, I mean, authority. No matter how interference on the part of international agencies that would like to monitor, actually, how the sort of the presidential race would go, would act and react, and the sort of the thing that you'd have to be quite aware of the end of the day, that each single individual Egyptian citizen will go for giving his own final actually say about what he would believe in, actually. I think that in the eyes of almost all the international organizations, even those very much, you know, I mean, endemic ones actually to the presidential authority, I think that the sort of the fair atmosphere through the aid of which, all these presidential elections would seem to be inaugurated will give a striking example of how democratic our own elections will be, and everything will be discussed in the due course of time. Will be highly publicized, actually, both nationally as much as internationally, actually, no matter how international organizations would interfere every now and again, just by way of monitoring, actually, how fair the sort of the thing is, and we'll go to.
Yes. Well, there are some voices that are calling for the boycotting the presidential elections. What is their argument? What are the reasons of them calling for boycotting the presidential elections, and how effective are these calls, do you feel, will be?
I mean, they will come to a zero point. These are enemies of the people, I would say. The people who would insist, and actually I would call for people actually to boycott, to try to, react against the process of elections. I think that Mr. Fattah Sisi, and always on previous speeches, he didn't motivate the people actually to go and to, elect him, or to give a sort of an individual voice in favor of his. The fact that all what he would do and insist on publicly publicizing his own, intentions is just dissent. Go straightforwardly to your own site. Say what would you like to say in the eyes of God, in the eyes of almost what you really believe in. There is no intimidation actually to be, conceived in any conceivable respect, and the sort of boycotting, I would say that this is just a tempest in a cup of tea. It would seem to be quite reaching to nothing at the end of the day, and somehow or another it is just a clear testimony to the fact that those people are very much hating their own homeland, their own native spots. They are against their own, sense of solidarity actually with the country. The sort of, being against their own native spot and their own homeland, and in the end of the day, they will get a sort of retribution of being very much humiliated, very much isolated from the rest of the community. They are to be themselves being boycotted, actually, on the part of the ordinary Egyptian citizens, I would say, at the end of the day.
Well, when the president actually launched his re-election campaign last month, he said that his government has completed 11,000 national projects in his brief first term. Now, how much do you feel this will help, or this helped, stabilize the country to some extent, and how much is still needed to be done?
Well, we still now get, the fruits and the results of the sort of accumulation of these extensive efforts. A large number of jobs actually will be, secured for a large number of people. The problematic issue actually of the mass unemployment is going to be solved actually in the due course of time. The expansion of the Suez Canal actually will not only provide ample opportunity for those people actually to go and to find alternatives for their own, extreme sense of laziness, I would say. But also in the meantime, you can really find on the social level, people are very much belonging to each other. The sort of the problematic situation of the dollar would come to a 0 point, and the sort of the high maximization of the prices are being very much controlled, and much the same way that the fisheries are being very much spread here, there, and everywhere. And the sort of the interference of the armed forces actually, every now and again, would strike a very good example of how, exceptional their own existence in our own lives would seem to be, just by way of solving our own problematic issues. The fact that I think that there are very much few tasks that will be initiated in the due course of time, and I think that in the due course of the 4 years to come, everything will be quite sorted from the previous history and the examination of the previous details and the sort of the previous success actually will give a clear testimony to the fact that each single individual step that has been done actually would seem to be in the interests of the Egyptian citizens actually, would seem to be in their own favor rather than against their own aspirations, as much as to be represented by those people who would call for the sort of boycotting elections actually.
Yes. Well, President Sisi will be running against the head of Al Ghad party, Mustafa Musa. What are the chances of Mr. Musa of actually winning these presidential elections?
Well, I can really say that we are living in the highest periods of democracy, of democratic intentions actually of the Egyptian people. Each single individual human citizen, whenever he would feel that is very much, eligible to the process of interfering, of publicizing, of talking about himself, of getting into the, election authority actually withdraw. There is no hindrances, there is no obstacles actually of any conceivable respect. And I think that Mr. Musa Mustafa actually, the case it stands, what seemed to be quite lagging behind. I wouldn't say that he's being, detained or very much, isolated or alienated actually. He can really publicize what he would seem to be quite after, and much the same way that not only Musa Mustafa, any other nominee actually may be very much eligible in the course of time, and would have to go and say his own say actually, if he would really if he should. But I think that again and again I would insist that the ordinary Egyptian citizen is quite aware of how prodigious the achievements are, of how, the man is very much from day one keeping an eye on the average mediocre of the working class people actually, of trying to secure their own problematic issues and secure a sort of a very much democratic life for them. A large number of voices actually during the presidential, pardons in the due course of time would set free a large number of prisoners and those who had been detained, on political reasons actually, in response for all these, callings on the part of his own sons, I would say. And this is also another clear testimony to the fact that the man is always living, mixing, mingling up to the task actually, side by side with his own people, I would say.
Yes. Well, a little bit over a month and the presidential elections will take place. Do you feel that, is there a fear of any sort of attempts by any organizations or any terrorist organizations or any force, whether political or non-political, having any sort of efforts to disrupt these presidential elections?
I wouldn't hopefully no, but what I would like to say and insist on that there was some slight declaration on some Daesh groups that will quantify actually their own attempts to try to rechange and reform and re-edit their own attempts to attack the governorates from within, not from without. I think that they have changed their own routines of attacks. That's why the comprehensive operation in Sinai, Northern Sinai, the central part of it to 2018 is just an inauguration actually of an attempt on the part of Mr. Fattah al-Sisi to try to put an end for all these threats. And in the meantime, I think that in the due course of time, the highest profile of measures of safety and security to churches, to mosques, to streets, to schools, to universities actually will be maximized also in the due course of time. This is one of the highest achievements that the presidential authority is quite aware. So no matter how, attempts on the part of those people to try to disrupt the sense of serenity and placidity of mind of the ordinary Egyptian citizens actually during the process of the presidential race, I would really say that they would fail at the end of the day. And hopefully that everything will be in the due course of time attuned as much as any single individual, peaceful, young Egyptian man would aspire to and would like to get at the end of the day.
Well, Dr. Al-Halim, we've seen over the past 4 years all the governmental achievements and the presidential achievements, whether if it's economically or the national mega projects or the foreign affairs file, all these things over the past 4 years. Now, whether President al-Sisi wins the presidential elections or Mr. Musa wins it, what would be the main challenges for the next 4 years for the Egyptian government?
Securing the border lines, pushing as much as fortifying our own life of peace, as much as securing the sort of the problematic issue actually of the water basin River Nile. I can really insist and represent one main fundamental fact that would be in tribute of Mr. Fattah al-Sisi, which is during the previous reign of previous President Mohammed Hosni Mubarak, when he was falsely attempted to be assassinated actually at Addis Ababa. The fact that all our own relations with the African Union, with African countries, came to be regarded as very much stopped to a greater extent for a large number of years, more than 15 years, with the return again actually to the presidential scene. Mr. Fattah al-Sisi would open his own arms wide open for discussion, to the extent that I would really insist on saying that he would carry his own coffin actually, at his own hands, straightforwardly going to Addis Ababa, the self-same place of the false attempt to try to assassinate the previous Muhammad Hosni Mubarak actually. And as in itself it really is. This is a very much courageous act. I wouldn't say that any other figure other than Mr. Fattah al-Sisi will be up to the task actually. And in more than one respect, in more than one presidential race, all what he insists on and upon is the fact that if anything would happen actually to Sinai, to the Egyptian citizens actually, I think that I would have to die actually before a single individual act of terrorism or sabotage actually will be directed and channeled to our own people, to my own people. I may be very much sacrificing the lives of almost all the individuals in Egypt. I wouldn't say that any other president in that particular respect in the previous 4 years actually would do such a very much approaches, successful details to the extent that of being able to sacrifice his own life for the sake of all the other communities, particularly the Egyptian individuals.
Yes, definitely. Well, ladies and gentlemen, a lot of developments are taking place in the Sinai Peninsula Operation Sinai 2018, comprehensive successes over the past few weeks, and we're already prepping for the upcoming presidential election slated for the 26th till the 28th of March, with President Fattah al-Sisi running for a second term against the head of Al-Ghad party, Mustafa Musa. We'll always be following up these developments of both issues here on Nile International. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this edition of the Daily Debate. But before we go, I'd like to thank our very distinguished guest, Dr. محمد الحليم, the political analyst. Dr. الحليم, thank you very much for joining us this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, please stay tuned for more coming up on Nile International. I'm Hani Saif. Thank you for joining us.